So we're working on advent of code challenges, problem 11. So we finished part 1 at this point. And I'm going to do something that I wouldn't normally do in a coding challenge, which is sort of some project maintenance type issues, or at least consider them and walk through them. And like for one, creating a GitHub repo right now and uploading everything so that, because maybe people ask about the code. But of course, if you're working on a project, that would be a good idea. In a professional setting, absolutely necessary. Excuse me, wow, that's going to be hard on your headphones. I apologize. Okay, so the second part of this would be just concerning the code, cleaning up things, and what would that mean? And it's sort of open-ended. So there's a number of things that can be done here. Considering the names, refactoring things to be faster, making things more clear, and there's a trade-off here because there is a part 2, and things might have to be modified greatly. But let's assume, I guess, that things are more stable than they probably are, and what would we do is to sort of like leave this code in a state where if somebody opened it up, they wouldn't be confused by it, or ourselves later wouldn't be confused by it, and see if there's anything there that we should do. And I would say the two primary considerations there are both from a business perspective and from a idiomatic closure perspective. What will people understand? And the balancing act there is pretty contextual on what's a good idea. So certain things we can do, so is if we never end up using a function, we should get rid of it. I think I just got rid of too many things. So let's remove any unused references, maybe space things out a little bit better. Those are some generic cleanup things we can do. Comments we should definitely look at and see if we want to keep them as comments, then we should add explanations like use this to run, explain this. If this was a project, would I be leaving this example code in here? Not without explaining it at the very least. And I would be leaving in here for now or moving this to a test because you would definitely want this for modifying things. So, but this name isn't good, for one. It's not that, it's the output isn't clear enough. It's like the expected output. And expected output of what? We should be very clear about like the place in the thing it ties to. And the two ways we can do that is we could either have a name or we could make it a local context. And I think here a local context would be better. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that how do we end up using this? We end up comparing it, right, our output to that. So let's put these in a let binding. For one. And this will solve our issue where we kept forgetting to reevaluate things and got the wrong output. So same thing with this. This should go in this let binding. And we'll just, what's back? There's a back barf that would be useful here. But I'll just retype it rather than think about it. And then current output also not good. I mean, like current output of what, right? Init grid. So this should be example init grid. Example log, grid log. I And so I'm just taking them over here to like sort of roughly clean things up, so that if somebody came back to this, now this is more debatable, because I mean we were looking at this code to fix a problem, but that problem's now gone, and I'm just not going to leave it around. It's not like high level enough. I think I would keep this here because somebody coming to this project might not know that this is an option. And in expecting them to know what this diff is doing is quite a bit. So I'd either have to leave a comment or I could put this in a function, but the function would be way too specific to move to a utility library. So this is really just an example. So I would sort of explain right here what's going on. And it doesn't, now we're moving these to local context. So what we could do is we can move this inside here. For the moment, we're going to move this inside here and comment it out, and then we're going to come back to it and add a comment once we're done with the other thing we're working on. And then we can just say like uncomment this and run it, and here are some things you can do inside this code block to check what's going on. Current output to example, right, because this is the main thing, right? Check if your logs are, I mean, this is sort of what the function is doing, but I'm kind of putting the comment here there to let you know that, like, this is what we're concerned about. Like, this isn't arbitrary that we're checking this. This is sort of the point. And example grids. So we want to example output grids to the, oh, and this name is good. So example expected would be better. Expected log, grid log. Yeah, expected grid log. And then we're going to check if that's equal to the and then right here, now if people want to see how these are different, and I mean, like, I wouldn't need to link to, there'd be no point in linking to the library because that's sort of, somebody would be able to figure that out by looking at the deps. That would be the safer thing. Just don't have to clutter up if you don't need to. How the structures differ. That's good enough. Check REPL. You know, you just want people to, when they're looking at it, to be able to do it quickly and not get stressed out because maybe they're new in the project and it's like they've made a change and something's wrong and it's like, well, what did the previous person do to debug this? And then this should be moved outside a comment. And this is inside our left block. Which is fine. Get rid of this and this. Just cleaning things up here. probably not a video anyone really wants to watch. And this is important because this is kind of like the big thing. And really in here, we talked about this earlier, but the ugliest part of this is grid, is calling vector here. And the way to fix that would be to have grid to grid log, not take a grid log. And how would we do that? Because that would sort of fix this issue. It does take a log. I guess it would be to output a space. It would be for the spaces chart file to output a spaces grid. This is kind of a silly thing to consider just to get rid of this vector call. I just don't like the idea of it outputting a grid log because it's not really what it is when you're parsing it. So that parser would become corrupted by the problem and become less reusable because of that. But grid to grid log. And even grid to grid log implies you're putting it, it's turning it into a grid log, which it's not. It's like creating the log. It's not just changing it so that your grid gets upgraded to a grid log. So it's a little bit confusing out of context of having built. Like if I hadn't built it, I wouldn't have assumed that's what was happening. Yeah, grid to grid log, it's like true, but it's like not telling you enough. You'd have to look at the code because you wouldn't know. Maybe it would just like take a structure and turn it into another one, not fill it in. Meaning like, as opposed to like list to map, right? Doesn't, or like, what's a function where the data would stay the same, but the organization would be, it's like you would keep the data the same, but you've changed the structure. Like a list to a vector, like a vector to a list, for instance, all the data inside of it is the same. And that's almost like what this grid to grid log implies. The data is the same, but this is actually adding data. It's like there's no way to sort of differentiate between those two. Okay, so I'm gonna leave this right now because I talked about it for like a minute and couldn't come up with anything. So I'm just leaving vector. These are some comments that aren't from the challenge that aren't useful anymore. Okay. So what else could be done? Another thing would be just commonalities in code. And the reason it's worth doing that is just so like, if they're truly things that are shared, then you wouldn't want to have you don't want to leave it to later to try to refactor those out because you'll remember even less that they're actually dependent on each other later than you do now. So nothing here is dependent. I think really just these rules, probably just these two rules, and they should be together and probably like labeled as such because they're very clearly business rules. And is empty probably needs to go inside this function. It's not used anywhere else, right? Yeah. That's why I don't know why I moved it below it. Is empty space is going to go inside this function, right? I don't use it anywhere else. Is space empty? Yes. Okay, it's only used here. we're going to move it inside this function. Which is easy to do. No editor shortcuts necessary. There certainly probably are some, but it's very cumbersome to try to memorize all those, and then they don't work sometimes. So resolve is a floor seat next to you are considered empty. We did resolve that. And then we've got a note here because we access indexes that are out of bounds. And they have to count as a space, and they have to count as empty end. And you know what? There, because, you know, someone might think, are you talking about the one above it or below it? Just because I've seen people do that where they write the comment below for above, and you like need to take a minute to figure it out. And I know the answer, so I can just be specific right now. Okay, and then I assumed, and we never use this function, so we can toss that. And then these two rules is occupied and for occupied. They have long names, but that's good because these are kind of like businessy. And they have a lot of shared stuff though. They get the space, they get the adjacent spaces, and then they check. And these parts are different. Is it worth trying to put those together? Yeah, I think so. So it's just going to be, what do they all take, a grid and a lock? Yeah. And what's the order we always do? Because we've done grid and lock before. So it's lock and grid. And this is going to get adjacent plus space plus adjacent. Maybe this isn't worth doing. Plus because it's like, it's so verbose. You know, we're just going to go to adjacent plus space. Because I think if you're concerned about this function, you're going to end up having to read the code in here, and like otherwise you'll just ignore this name because my editor feels really slow all of a sudden. I wonder if something isn't up. So basically, this. Which doesn't work because adjacent looks has to be bound. Which isn't a problem, just has to put it on that binding. Oh. We don't need this we don't need to return the JSON locations. Why is this all format all screwed up? No, it's not screwed up. It's just pushed over, which is fine. That looks a little bit better. And then basically copy these two things down here. So it's also possible that maybe we should be, excuse me, it's also possible that we should just be passing in the space in the adjacent spaces. Kind of goes both ways really, because like is occupied, if you're asking if it's occupied, you would want to be giving the location in the grid in one context, and you could also ask it of a space in the adjacent spaces. You don't really need the full grid though to answer that question. You just need the space in the adjacent spaces. So really this loc and this should take these as inputs. Which is what I'm going to go do right now. Where do we use this? Right here. I'm going to transfer this into here. And then I'm going to update this so that it takes the space. Call it spaces. Well, what it'll have is a space in the adjacent spaces. I keep pausing because I'm expecting it to autocomplete and it's not. And then the same thing up here. I didn't mean to. I keep cutting and I mean to copy. I like momentarily forgot the shortcut for copy. Copy this expression. And you see, this is like, you can just kind of tell this is better. I mean, we haven't optimized anything. Hopefully we haven't used any bugs. But, and we should have tried after fixing one of them. But, okay, so why is it better? The reason it's better is because now, previously, like these, like the name right now is kind of good that it's long because it's like a business thing and you're like, so we're trying to mirror that. And now when you go look at this, it's very clear like how you're achieving that in the smallest context possible. You're not doing like a lot of setup work. You're just getting right to this like rule part as quickly as possible. Like this one's even better. There's just like an and statement right away. Right away you know you're like in logic, like and this and that and this, and it's like this is what we need to have happen. And if you were, and you know, and I've got these comments here right above it. And then what we would do is I would be like seeding rules. And then, I mean, the next step would be moving these to their own file, I would think. You would put these like in a dedicated file, and it's like anyone, if you come in here, you know these are like your seeding logic rules. That would be better than this, because this comment is not as tractable. And then what would be even better than that? I don't know, a rules-based system, but that might not have. Yeah, I think like something like the Reedy algorithm could potentially be efficient for this, but I'm not going to think about that too much because it's kind of like, I don't know enough about it to be sure. And yeah, it just feels like now you know what you're looking at, and those are, because everything else is kind of like fluff just to massage things to get to that point, right? Like even this function after that's collecting all the information, it's really not, like it's aggregating it, but it's not the concern of the business how you aggregate things. It is the concern of the business now that you've like encoded these things exactly this way. Like they don't, like, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that like they very much care about greater than 4, but they don't care that you used a cond here instead of a case. You know, if you did it with like another way and it ended up being the same, like there might be a performance difference, but they wouldn't care about it outside of that. Nobody using the app would care about outside of that. Oh, we should definitely go right now, but I did all this talking and we need to check that things are still the same. What's our best way of doing that? This should be commented out. What's the end of the look block? This guy. Good, it's still true. Because I would have felt, would have been really disappointing. Let's evaluate the file and be sure. Nope. It's not bound to a key for some reason. Still true. Great. This is an example. Log to occupied count. I mean, that's kind of a very custom function, but I mean, like, it is with the question that's being asked. So in this context, it's not weird to call it out. And, you know, like, would I make a more general one? Yeah, I mean, the second somebody, like, asked me, now we need a different count for something else, you'd have a different one, I think. You'd have a more general function, or you wouldn't even write one, because there's only, like, 3 closure core functions there. Spacing issue on this, nothing too big. Grid last, takes a log grid to a grid log. That seems clear. Next grid is good. New grid log, that makes sense. Grid to next grid, still good. Column ignoring it, row grid, that's... There was the question of if we could do better than reduce inside of reduce. I'm not gonna worry about it. I don't think it's the case, but because 4 doesn't give you the index, which is why we went that route in the first place. This just automatically looks great. We talked about, I mean, what do I mean automatically? I mean like, we get right away into handling these rules. Even this could be, where does this get used? To new space, grid to new space. Because we could even raise this up one more and get the spaces here and pass them in. And so it would just be spaces to new space, space to new space. Yeah, right? I mean, because it just sounds right. Like you take a space, I want the updated space. So, and it won't even be hard to do. So take spaces. This will get called here. Actually, right? This is a lot to read on one line. Is that a problem, though? Well, what make it look better would be start with the grid. Adds location. This is better because now it's like I'm looking at this visually and I'm reading, because I'm used to reading top down, left to right. This is like easier on my mind to say that the grid, it's a thread last, and the first thing it's giving is a location. The function on the left is already prepped me for that, plus the grid. I know it's going there, and it's going to give me an adjacent plus a space, which I'm going to rename to just spaces. Did it update it in reverse? I'm hoping this worked. This is like new tech. Local grid spaces. Wait, was that, I don't think that was the right thing. Adjacent plus space. What am I trying to do? I just want to use the name space instead of adjacent plus space. I just think it's like spaces is good for now, just because that's the word. Space is the word I chose. So this is adjacent plus space, and I want this just to be spaces for sure. Awesome. And then loc plus grid got changed, didn't it? It's no longer loc plus grid. I think I updated. Yeah. Oh, loc plus grid does need the grid. No, it doesn't. I mean, it already has the information about the floor. Keys, space. Oh, you see? That's just better. all around. Oh, and this goes away too. So it's just like, just matching. There's no logic in the matching. Yeah. It's exciting stuff. It's like, you're like, you know, we're doing all this refactoring, and then the next part 2 is going to blow it all away, because it's going to have to be like, introduce a whole bunch of algorithms and tear out all of this, at least tear it out and have to rebuild it in another way. I mean, why would that be? Because there's going to be competition over demand, right? It's like two competing forces, the performance and then the clarity of the logic. And those are opposed to each other, because like, it's like if I say I'm going to, it's like the difference between I'm saying I'm going to California and then describing the entire trip to California. Like, you know, imagine somebody asked what you did on your weekend, instead of like telling them you drove someplace and like went to an apple orchard. Instead of saying that, you like started to describe, you know, all the things you did. And that's what we're doing when we're like lowering the abstraction layer to tell the machine specifically how to do something faster. There's those are competing demands. Okay, what else? Does symbol to space get used in multiple places? I do use it here, but this is just for parsing this thing. You know, it's kind of nice to have it by itself. If it was just used in one place, I'd have it somewhere else. If it was just using this function, I would definitely just plop it in here for right now. But I'm going to take a break really quick. All right, I'm back. So some more refactorings that are obviously too much for a coding challenge. One thing that would, so you'd have to do it somewhere, maybe not in this file, is maybe you would link to somewhere in this file about like the you know, something in context about the problem that's being solved and how it relates to other stuff. That would be nice. Does that often happen where I work? No. Usually because the types of things I'm working on are like web applications, and it's very obvious that this HTML page exists for a reason. Like usually the problem you're tackling is covers a lot more surface space than this, meaning it's like spread out. And so you don't have this like concise file where you can like really feel good about making commentary about the entire thing. But we can here, so we should just look real quick. And the way to do that would be saying like, I'm just realizing this comment should be removed. Or changed. So the idea here is, goal is to, at least a part 1 goal. So let's just go with that. Find the number of occupied spaces. Right, that's what we ended up having to in a seating chart. Occupied spaces. Well, that's not just the goal, because you have to do more than that, but that's like the primary goal in a seating chart. In a grid seating arrangement. I'll just call it chart. A whole bunch of people sitting together is like a seating arrangement, not a seating chart. I guess seating chart because you like assign people in the chart. Yeah, I think both would be fine, or good enough is the way to put it. It wouldn't be misleading. And we're gonna make a comment here that we also call that a grid. because we quickly turn it and start calling it a grid in this code. And that's, I mean, that's fine. If we call it out here, that's okay. We're pretty consistent, but we might want to change all our grids to seating charts. We'll think about that. And then we need to produce. So to do this, we take an initial. To do this, we take a initial. And I just realized this wouldn't be here at the top. Closure files are bottom up, meaning if you're looking to know what's going on, your best bet is to go to the bottom and look at the highest level function. Because why would that be? Is because like you're building up a function, and so the highest level function in a file has to be at the bottom, unless you're pre-declaring things. But really, there's no. That's not common, and people don't do that to solve this problem of readability. So I wouldn't expect it. I would expect it to be. Okay, I'm pausing just because there's all this code here to parse, and I don't like it. I think it's distracting, but that's because I'm looking at it. I guess I should just like be very, like put a bold thing here, like start here. Now it's like, if you look at this, your eye should be drawn to it. I mean, how could we do that with the code though to make people have to do it? You know, or like, I guess it would be a convention in your company. Like there's always going to be a start here, and you know to search for it, because there's nothing in closure that would help with that. Color grid. To this we get the initial seating chart. Let's use the exact words that we do in our example. I'm moving things around so this code can be part of the narrative. Oh, I confused myself on what that was for a second. I thought that was the example output, because I thought it was the example grid log that we're given. Excuse me. To do this, we're given an initial seating example. Yeah, that's good enough. And now it's like, this is very clearly a variable you can look for, and so your brain's connected to it. I'm okay with that. Grid. This log to occupied count is not a good function, which I'll explain in a second. And we create a grid log. Do I want to talk about a grid log though? Nobody cares about that but me. It's like it's not part of the narrative. So, yeah. Should be. It's fine to have this grid to grid log, and I want to keep it as a function because it's really important to have that grid log for us. But final arrangement is really the thing that in the narrative you would care about. And that's just going to be a really short wrapper over last. I mean, all this is going to change. So. And this is going to take a grid. And this isn't correct. Grid. Now I've kind of hidden the grid log. And we might do a text replace to change all our grids to search logs to seeding charts. What? Oh, because I ran it in the middle. $37 was the amount, right? Yeah, don't bother checking if the logs are equal. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit tired, so I'm going into autopilot and just typing things without talking. So what I've done here is I did a couple things in a row. which means I'll have to backtrack. But I mean, the last thing I did is helpful debugging info because that's what this is. And start here, like, could be a convention for talking about things I do when I work on a file. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of building up a quick little narrative about the code. So if you came in here, you'd be like, yeah, makes sense. You know, conversely, you can always move fast and break things, and then continually break them really fast. It's another strategy. Instead of trying to write understandable code, you can just make it really hard to understand, and then kind of churn on that endlessly. Example grid. Why isn't this being used? Oh, because this is the thing we check. No, we don't need to comment that out, but something like is the output that we should get is the grid log. That should be produced. Okay, I mean, kind of takes like 2 seconds to call these things out. And if I'm leaving them in here as comments for myself or someone else, it makes sense to kind of wrap them up in the narrative. And this is all in a let block, which I didn't realize I was in a let block when I was writing some of these things. Where does the other let block? I'm just trying to see where the let block ends. Right there. Oh, that's why it doesn't make sense to have it all the way down here. Not perfect, but I've sort of hit a wall with, you know, doing this where I don't want to start nitpicking things too much. I would just move on because I've pretty much done the main part. As soon as I clean this up and we create a grid, and then the count. Does this work if you... Do things get like highlighted? I'm sorry, I'm curious if you... Yeah. So if you really want to call out these variables, which is nice. Okay. We have an error, loc grid to new space.
something didn't get updated, which is not going to be hard to fix. Okay, I need to like look at the error because it says it's not to past look plus grid when Millie is around. Super, where is it being called? Let's see our new tech, and this is on look plus grid to new space. Only getting called once, and it's a function, which means it probably shouldn't be its own function. Come on. Sort of hoping when I clicked on this it would tell me. Oh, did I just open up yeah, it opens up a menu. Actually it says highlight reference. Z-A for all of them. How do I toggle all of them? Toggle open. That's how I don't want to see it, I want to go to it. Find reference. Log plus grid to new space. Log plus. And then if I click on this, it says find references, which is what I want. And then the bottom it says LSP not found. Oh yeah, we were going to update these. Log plus grid. Oh, no, that does get a log plus grid spaces to new space. Log plus grid to new space. Why does it say it's getting wrong number arguments too? It's not getting past 2 arguments. What does spaces return? What does log plus grid to spaces return? It only returns one thing. Okay, I just hadn't updated my revel. Okay, the other thing is, if you really, the other thing that could happen here is collapsing all of this into one function. And what do I mean by that? I mean that like look here, we've got these one reference. These are really not getting used somewhere else. And so like having a file like this where they're all available to people is potentially misleading and even could introduce errors, because like as I'm writing it right now, I'm not intending it to be pulled into somewhere else in another context. If that needs to happen, somebody should do that, and at that point that's okay, but right now it's not the case. I didn't write it that way. I'm not like offering it to you. I don't want you to think that I'm offering it to you, because it's not a general purpose thing. I want you to come here and like only look at the function and think like there's only one function here at the high level. You know, everything else was just boiler code to get to this goal. So it's very reasonable that I would pull all of these into one function and just have, because it's like this file is code and moving them all into one function is still code. It doesn't like, and also like the moving them into one thing is work that it has to be done manually. I don't think there's something that can help you with that. But if you just have like things in a let binding, I think there might be a way to even promote them. So I just had something like this. How long does it, is there a way to promote? Extract function. That did not do the right thing. That also didn't really do the right thing. For a let binding. I'm gonna check this real quick. CLJR refactor. I mean, I don't know if this exists. I just like wish it existed. What the hell? I think that there's just a page where it lists all of them. Yes, I want a cheat sheet. And then I want to search it for let binding. And this, we'll just try this once. Introduce let, expand let, remove let. Expand let? Doesn't sound right. Yeah, I guess it would be extract function. I mean, this isn't too bad, right? Okay, so there isn't a macro to do it, but really, it wouldn't be too many keystrokes to move things out, especially just one. I'm not going to do that here. I'm not going to put all these in one function, especially because we've got the next part to do, and it just probably, this is probably enough. But in real code, I think that there's a strong argument for wanting to do that. We did so many things. It's kind of a love-hate relationship with this highlighting. I mean, here's the thing. I guess when I make smaller changes, this is not as much a rainbow. Yeah, that's good. I mean, because yeah, I mean, we made so many changes that there's not a good one commit. I mean, I guess I could have listed out everything I did. If if in production code, I would probably call out everything I did there, at least in 1 or 2 lines. But if I did it that way, if I chose to make a bulk commit like that, but typically I would try to do like one thing at a time. I don't know. It's like, it's whatever you feel is worthwhile. Okay, that's good enough. I'm gonna stop it here for this part.